Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Afghanistan, where U.S. troops have started leaving the country for the initial troop withdrawal mandated by the Doha Agreement. Under the deal, the U.S. will cut the number of forces in the country to 8,600 from the current 13,000. The spokesperson for U.S. forces in Afghanistan said Washington has begun its conditions-based reduction of forces to 8,600 over 135 days. Colonel Sonny Leggett said the step is being taken in accordance with the U.S.-Afghanistan Declaration and the U.S.-Taliban Agreement. He said the U.S. forces maintain all military means and authority to accomplish its objectives, including anti-ISIS and al-Qaeda operations. The Taliban say they have handed Kabul government a list of 5,000 fighters to be released as part of the prisoner exchange agreed in the Doha deal. In a tweet, spokesperson Suhail Shaheen says the group will only accept individuals mentioned in the provided list. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's Human Rights Commission says they have not been informed about the procedure of the release yet. Earlier, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani said he would issue a presidential decree on release of prisoners as the mechanism had been finalized, but the decree has not been issued so far. Meanwhile, the U.S. has denounced the parallel governments in Afghanistan after former Chief Executive Abdullah swore himself in as president in opposition to Ashraf Ghani. Last month, the Election Commission declared Ghani winner in the presidential election, but Abdullah rejected the results. In a tweet, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington strongly opposes any use of force to resolve political differences. Pompeo said all disagreements must be solved through amicable means. The Secretary of State said prioritizing an inclusive government is paramount for peace and the future of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said he will continue to talk to both leaders for an inclusive Afghan government. Khalilzad says both Ghani and Abdullah have said they are open to negotiations to end the political crisis and prioritize peace. Moving towards India, activists and civil rights bodies in Assam held a massive rally against the controversial Citizenship Act on Holi. 83 people, mostly Muslims, have been killed in countrywide demonstrations against the law since 11th December. Thousands of civilians carried fire torches in a night rally and burnt a symbolic effigy of the new citizenship law. Women in Delhi also held a rally against the law, demanding its immediate withdrawal. Meanwhile, the all-women sit-in at Shaheen Bagh and Mumbai Bagh continue despite pressure by police and the BJP government. The Indian government has faced strong opposition at both the domestic and international front over this new law. U.S. President Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have discussed the ongoing oil crisis over the phone. Oil prices jumped by about 8% a day after hitting a 30-year low following the kingdom's announcement of plans to ramp up production. The dramatic drops were triggered by a row between Saudi Arabia and Russia over oil outputs. Saudi Arabia said it would slash prices and pump more oil, sparking fears of a price war. This came after Russia rejected an OPEC proposal to cut supplies to cope with lower demand due to the coronavirus outbreak. The Russian parliament has adopted a constitutional amendment that could allow President Vladimir Putin to remain in power until 2036. Putin is required by the constitution to step down in 2024 when his second sequential presidential term ends. But the proposed change would formally reset his presidential term tally to 0. A total of 382 MPs voted for the proposed changes to the constitution, with 44 abstaining. Lawmakers will vote for the measures in the third and final reading on Wednesday. Putin has been in power for the last 20 years. U.S. President Donald Trump will be visiting Moscow to mark Victory Day celebrations on 9th May. The Kremlin confirms it received a call from the White House telling it President Trump won't be visiting. Victory Day commemorates Nazi Germany's surrender to the Soviet Union in May 1945. Russian President Vladimir Putin presides over an annual parade on the event, which is usually used to show off Russian military hardware. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the Kremlin does not know who would represent the U.S. at the event. Voting has begun in 6 states to decide whether Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders will face President Donald Trump in November. The major contest is in Michigan, where polls suggest Bernie Sanders is in danger of suffering a defeat. Last week, Joe Biden got the victory in 10 of 14 states to regain his status as a frontrunner. More in this report.
Today's Democratic primaries are the first one-on-one duel between Biden and Sanders since other major candidates dropped out of the race. Michigan is the second biggest prize of the 6 that are deciding their choice of Democratic candidate to face off with Donald Trump in November. Most candidates that have dropped out so far have thrown their support behind ex-Vice President Joe Biden, saying a moderate has the best chance to defeat Trump.
Senator Sanders, as the mother would say, God bless him, likes to say we're only going to beat Donald Trump by generating excitement and turnout. Well, guess what? On Super Tuesday, we turned out 70% more voters than ever voted there. And guess what? They voted for us.
Earlier, Sanders skipped his plan to campaign in Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois to focus on Michigan. Along the way, he secured the endorsement of veteran civil rights leader Jesse Jackson.
We are going to do everything humanly possible to wipe out all forms of discrimination in this country. We are sick and tired of systemic racism in America. We're tired of a wealth gap where white families have 10 times more wealth than black families.
Michigan is a must-win for Sanders, who narrowly won it during his failed 2016 bid for the Democratic nomination. However, Biden, who holds a double-digit lead in the latest state polls, can send the Sanders campaign reeling with a victory.
China's President Xi Jinping says the coronavirus outbreak has been largely curbed in the country's worst-hit areas. He said this while visiting the quarantined city of Wuhan for the first time since the disease was identified there in December 2019. President Xi said the situation is under control in Hubei province. During the president's trip, authorities eased restrictions for healthy people traveling to low-risk areas. State media reported that Wuhan's 16 makeshift hospitals have also been closed. More than 4,000 people have died and over 100,000 have been infected by the new coronavirus worldwide, with a majority in China. The global death toll from the new coronavirus has passed 4,000 after the outbreak spread to over 100 countries with more than 110,000 infections. The Italian government has put the entire country under a lockdown after the COVID-19 cases spiked in all 20 of its regions. Iran has reported 54 new deaths from the virus in the past 24 hours, bringing the overall death toll to 291. More in this report.
Global hysteria is rising as the novel coronavirus continues to spread across the world. In Europe, the whole of Italy, a country of some 60 million people, has been placed under quarantine. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has cancelled all public gatherings and asked people to stay at home.
That means that people shall avoid, on the whole territory, to move unless motivated by 3 specific circumstances: important work reasons, urgent necessary reasons, or health reasons. In the Middle East, Iran has reported 54 new deaths, raising the toll to over 290. The UN has recommended that Iran temporarily release all political prisoners, saying dual and foreign nationals are at risk in Iranian jails. This comes after Iran temporarily released 70,000 prisoners on Monday. Meanwhile, the WHO warns that the outbreak is threatening to become a global pandemic and can cost the world economy up to $2 trillion.
Now that the virus has a foothold in so many countries, the threat of a pandemic has become very real. But it would be the first pandemic in history that could be controlled. The bottom line is we're not at the mercy of the virus.
In the US, incoming White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has self-quarantined, saying he might have come into contact with an infected person. In Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo has also confirmed its first coronavirus case. Meanwhile, Mongolia has barred anyone from entering or leaving its cities for 6 days after reporting its first case of the disease.
Moving on to Turkey, which says its forces will patrol to the north of a security corridor being set up in Syria's Idlib province. In an interview, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said the Russians will patrol the southern part around a highway in Idlib. Cavusoglu said Ankara will retaliate if Syria stages a future attack on its troops. He said the US had offered land, sea and air intelligence on Idlib. Cavusoglu said the Turkish purchase of a Russian air defense system is not an obstacle to Ankara deploying US Patriot missiles. The Russian military says it has escorted 13 Turkish convoys to observation posts in the Idlib de-escalation zone. On March 5th, the presidents of Turkey and Russia announced a ceasefire and joint military patrolling in Idlib scheduled to begin on Sunday. Turkey has announced it is hosting a summit in Istanbul on 17th March to discuss the migrant crisis unfolding at its border with Greece. Speaking to reporters while returning from Brussels, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the leaders of France, Germany and the UK will attend the summit. He said Turkey isn't considering closing its border to Europe for now and that Greece must open its own gates. Erdogan also said the US is softening its stance on a potential sale of US Patriot defense systems to Turkey. He said Washington also asked Ankara to guarantee it will not activate its Russian S-400 defense systems. Meanwhile, Turkey says it has killed 36 militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria and Iraq. The Defense Ministry says the militants died in operations Peace Spring and Euphrates Shield. The ministry said the army killed 18 PKK fighters attempting to infiltrate northern Syrian territories. It said 13 others were killed in an operation in Tel Rifat. The ministry said 5 militants were killed in military operations backed by air power in Iraq's Kandil region. Ankara identifies the PKK group as terrorists and holds them responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year-old conflict. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says the UAE, Jordan and Egypt supplied weapons to the Khalifa Haftar-led Libyan National Army. In a report, the institute said the states provided armored vehicles and military helicopters to Haftar's army over the last 5 years. The report said fighter jets and drones supplied by the UAE had been used in the Libyan civil war during 2019. It said no state supplying weapons to Haftar followed the UN arms embargo on Libya. The research institute said the UAE's involvement in Libya is part of its assertive foreign policy. In April last year, Haftar's military launched a campaign to capture Tripoli from the internationally recognized Government of National Accord. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. The Malaysia's opposition parties have criticized the cabinet named by new Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. Yesterday, Yassin announced a 70-member cabinet far larger than Mahathir's last 55-member body. Former Minister Khalid Abdul Samad said the lineup will only satisfy the new parties of the governing alliance. His party colleague Salahuddin Ayyub said the size of the cabinet is too big, adding it is not good for the country. Another opposition leader, Fahmi Fadzil, criticized the lack of women in the new cabinet, with only 13% of its membership. Muhyiddin was appointed Malaysia's 8th Prime Minister by the King last week after Mahathir stepped down. On a state visit to Jakarta, Dutch King Willem-Alexander has apologized for his country's violent and aggressive policies during and immediately after its colonial rule of Indonesia in the 1940s. Indonesia declared its independence in 1945 following a brief occupation by the Japanese and 350 years as a Dutch colony. Holland did not recognize Indonesian sovereignty until 1949. In a joint statement with President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, the king said that the past cannot be erased and it will have to be acknowledged by each generation. He said the pain and sorrow of the affected families continue to be felt today. Alexander said ties between the two countries are becoming stronger and more diverse. In 2013, the Dutch government apologized to Indonesia and paid damages to those killed in acts of colonial violence. Unidentified assailants have killed at least 43 people in raids on villages in northern Burkina Faso. In a statement, the government said the villages Dingiola and Barga in Yatenga province were targeted on Sunday. The statement said 6 other people were hospitalized with injuries. President Roch Marc Christian Kabore announced 2 days of national mourning over the atrocities. No one has claimed responsibility for the attacks yet. But tit-for-tat reprisal killings between the Fulani and rival farming communities have surged over the past year across Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. Burkina Faso has been battling a militant insurgency since 2015. Boko Haram militants have killed 8 soldiers in an attack on an army post in Niger's southeastern region of Diffa. The Defense Ministry says 3 others are missing after the attack. The ministry says the post was attacked by 20 heavily armed vehicles. It said the army destroyed the assailants after exchanging fire. The region, which borders Nigeria and Chad, has been repeatedly attacked by the Boko Haram since 2015. Located in the Lake Chad Basin, Diffa is home to 120,000 refugees from Nigeria fleeing the group's violence. In the Netherlands, prosecutors have accused Russia of interfering with the criminal probe into the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. The aircraft was shot down with a Russian-made missile over eastern Ukraine in July 2014. Speaking in the court, prosecutor Thijs Berger said there are clear indications of Russian agencies trying to disrupt the probe. He said the British and Dutch authorities determined that Russian agents were involved in hacking the Malaysian investigators' system. Berger said this information casts a dark shadow over the case proceedings. The prosecutor said several witnesses say that they would fear for their lives if their identities were revealed. The trial opened in the absence of 4 suspects. In Russia, wilderness of Siberia is tuning with the classical music as more music enthusiasts have vowed to promote the cultural tunes. Melodies of Beethoven, Mozart and Vivaldi can be heard coming from a clubhouse in a remote village. More in this report.
In the vast, wild, and rugged land of Siberia, a local farmer, Rusanov, is an enthusiast of classical music. After tending to his goats and chickens at home, Rusanov indulges in the melodies. The music lover makes an orchestra, and the group enjoy playing Beethoven, Mozart, and Vivaldi. Rusanov says the idea for the orchestra came when a Bulgarian violinist moved to the village.
Once we got an idea, the first violinist in the orchestra came from Bulgaria, and we dreamt of setting up a symphony orchestra. He'd only just come from Sofia, from Bulgaria, from the seaside, so to say, and we kept dreaming about it. He worked with me. In the end, we decided that we needed to start, and the guys told me it would be good to have live music.
Rusanov says that at the beginning he started playing simple pieces and later got to the Mozart and Beethoven. He's relieved that the classical music is getting popular.
We didn't think that classical music would be popular, but we had hope. Now it's turned out that the concert halls are overflowing. It turned out to be such in high demand by normal people. We mainly do variety shows. We give musical lectures, tell people about composers. There are lots of children and the concert hall is always full for every concert.
The orchestra includes 20 musicians, and 2 of them are former military officers. The group has become the pride of the village.
In Mexico, climate change and water scarcity are forcing farmers to abandon traditional staples like corn in favor of more viable options. Others are giving up farming altogether, selling their fields and leaving their ancestral homelands. More in this report.
Corn has been a symbol of Mexican pride for centuries and formed the backbone of the civilization that gave rise to this country. But its future is now in doubt as climate change and endless droughts transform the Mexican landscape.
We didn't get the rain that was supposed to fall in June, July, August or September. And that's what we see now. The maize didn't grow because there was no water.
In Puebla State, which is known as the Mexican cradle of corn, cultivation has plummeted by 18%.
We have seen the flora and fauna has changed and there are longer periods of drought and higher temperatures. During winter, the drops in temperature are harsher and all that has consequences on the agricultural sector in the region.
Farmers are now turning to less water-intensive crops like pistachio or cactus. Others are selling their fields to real estate developers and looking for other ways to make a living. This phenomenon threatens the country's food supply and is likely to drive up prices of basic essentials.
Hindus in the Pakistani city celebrated the Holi festival. They danced and adorned each other's faces with colored powder. The festival is celebrated as a thanksgiving for a good harvest and to mark the start of spring. This report has details.
Explosions of pink and purple powder, rainbow dust tumbling through the air, faces, hair, hands and clothes rendered in a kaleidoscope of colors. Hindus in Pakistan took to the streets to celebrate Holi, one of the world's most photogenic religious festivals. On the eve of the festival, large pyres were lit to signify the burning of evil spirits.
We celebrate this festival of colors so that the lives of all of us are filled with happiness and joy, and life must go on. The concept of Holi is victory of good over evil and bringing joyfulness in human lives.
Hindus form the biggest minority community in Pakistan. According to official estimates, 7.5 million Hindus live in the country.
Being a Pakistani, I feel immensely happy that as a Hindu, I don't encounter any problems and that we have full rights here and we celebrate our each festival in a free and befitting manner.
Although the festival finds its origins in South Asia, it has now gained popularity across the world. This year in India, coronavirus fears dampened some Holi celebrations as the number of colour buyers has decreased by at least 50%. This is because some are concerned the colours used for Holi were being imported from China.
We're taking a short break. Stay with us. In business, South Korea and Japan have begun a fresh round of trade talks despite an ongoing diplomatic quarrel. Seoul said the countries conducted a Director General level video conference after enacting border blockades because of the new coronavirus outbreak. South Korea's DG for International Trade Policy Lee Hoo-hyun attended the video conference while his counterpart Yoichi Leader represented Japan. The meeting is expected to run through today's afternoon. In December, a meeting in Tokyo broke up without any progress. The trade dispute began in July last year after Japan restricted chip and display industries exports to Seoul. In response, Seoul removed Tokyo from its list of its trusted partners and sought mediation from the World Trade Organization. Wall Street stocks have rebounded as investors pinned hopes on policy easing by major central banks and governments. Global markets plummeted in the previous session over fears of a coronavirus-driven recession. The upsurge in markets was led by a boost in energy shares. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index soared over a lift in Chevron stocks. The shares of Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google's parent company Alphabet rose nearly 2%. The indices of S&P 100 and Nasdaq Composite gained ground. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump called the Federal Reserve pathetic and slow-moving. He said the central bank could bring U.S. interest rates down to the level of competitor nations. European markets have edged higher, recovering yesterday's losses after stocks on Wall Street saw their worst day since the 2008 financial crisis. Investors are betting on coordinated stimulus measures by major central banks to shield the global economy from the effects of the coronavirus outbreak. London's FTSE 100 has risen over 2%, bouncing back from its worst session in over 10 years. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 2% higher, while Frankfurt's DAX has added 1.5%. In Asia, Shanghai Composite led the gains, closing nearly 2% higher. Hong Kong's Hang Seng picked up almost 1.5% as shares of Chinese tech giant Tencent and Alibaba grew nearly 3% each.
You know, I do think we're in fear. People are just indiscriminate selling. Thursday and Friday, you saw long-only sell. A lot of the broker desk that I work with reported that. And so when you get to the point where the long-onlys are selling, that truly is risk-off. And that was before the lack of agreement and the OPEC trade negotiations fell apart. So you're going to see even more of that today.
Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.